This is PsychBoost, helping you with your psychology qualification, one video at a time. This video is on psychological problems, and in this 23rd video we'll be covering addiction. The very kind support of students and teachers who donate on Patreon help me help you by continuing to make these videos and resources. A very big thank you for all of your help, guys. To join them, follow the link. For everyone, you may want to check out the free worksheets for this video and the quiz. So as usual, here are the terms on the AQA GCSE specification we're going to cover in this video. As we go through the video, they'll be in red text. You need to be able to respond to questions on all of this. So let's start with a few basic definitions. Dependence and addiction. A dependence is the physical need for a substance. There are signs that someone is dependent. They'll start to develop a tolerance, so they'll need increasing amounts in order to get the same effect. And withdrawal. These are a range of negative physical and mental symptoms when the substance is stopped. Addiction is a compulsive and irrational behaviour to use a substance. This behaviour is out of control, with the addict ignoring significant negative and harmful consequences. So the main difference is dependence is physical and addiction is behavioural. Substance misuse and substance abuse. Many drugs are legal, such as prescription drugs. They come with clear legal and medical guidelines on how they should be used. Substances are misused when these guidelines are not followed. So this can be in the form of taking too much or too little, stopping a drug treatment early, or using somebody else's prescription. Substance abuse, however, is when somebody uses drugs with the intention of changing their mental state to get an emotional high. This can be with illegal drugs or prescription drugs. Often the intention is recreation or an attempt to self-medicate. The IDC is used for diagnosing addiction. It's a medical tool in which the experience of a patient is matched against criteria for a disorder. It's updated frequently to match the latest scientific knowledge, and it's published by the World Health Organization. You can read the current version on this link. When diagnosing addiction, clinicians consider 3 symptoms, and they are a strong desire to use substances despite the harmful consequences. So, a person with the addiction knows there are harmful effects from their actions, but they'll still continue. A difficulty controlling use. So even if the person with the addiction wants to slow or stop their use, they're unable to resist. And a higher priority is given to the substance than other activities or obligations. So people with an addiction will often ignore their commitments to family, friends, work or school so they can continue their addiction. When thinking of evaluating the use of the ICD, we can say the use of a clear bullet point list helps clinicians be objective when giving a diagnosis. And the ICD is regularly updated with new scientific knowledge. One example relating to addiction is the inclusion of gaming disorder in the ICD-11, diagnosing people with impaired control over gaming. But using a simple tick list might be reducing the ability of doctors in using their own judgment to diagnose. Also, the ICD is an international guide. However, the experience of mental health conditions like addiction might be experienced very differently around the world. The inclusion of the diagnosis of gaming disorder in the ICD-11 alongside gambling might be stigmatizing the healthy use of video games. So that was the definition of addiction and how it's diagnosed. Let's look at the theories behind the causes of addiction and some treatments. The biological explanation of addiction suggests there are some people who are born with a genetic vulnerability to addictive behaviour. This is due to the inheritance of certain genes from their parents. The biological explanation then focuses on the influence of nature. Now it seems that there isn't an addiction gene, but it's more likely there's a combination of genes that result in increased vulnerability. The term for when a characteristic is the result of multiple genes working in combination is polygenetic. An advantage of explaining an addiction as genetic is it might reduce stigma. Many people think addiction is simply a lack of self-control. If addiction is partly genetic, then it's outside of an individual's control. It might be that there are not genes for increased risks of addiction, but actually there are genes that make the likelihood of taking drugs in the first place, like genes for risky behaviour. Also, genes cannot produce an addiction on their own. There has to be at least some access to the addictive substance and some experience using the substance. There is a study that investigated the genetics of addiction. Kaji conducted a twin study in Sweden investigating the concordance in alcohol abuse. A concordance rate is the likelihood of two people sharing a characteristic. The higher the concordance rate is in identical twins compared to fraternal twins, the more likely that characteristic is to be genetic. Kaji investigated the rate of alcohol abuse in identical and fraternal twins. Data was used from a sample of 310 male Swedish twins, all identified from government records on people with drinking problems. These twins were then interviewed to look for patterns of alcohol abuse. Kaji used this information to calculate the concordance rate for alcohol abuse in both identical and fraternal twins. Kaji found the concordance rate was 54% in identical twins, but only 28% in fraternal twins. From these results, Kaji concluded there are genetic factors in alcohol addiction. So let's evaluate Kaji's study. As a positive, Kaji used a large sample size and showed a large effect. This provides strong statistical evidence that alcohol addiction is genetic. Knowing this can help health professionals, because knowing alcohol addiction runs in families can lead them to ask about and offer help to other family members who may be suffering. However, this research might only be limited to alcohol addiction. Perhaps it's only alcohol addiction that has a genetic aspect. And the results are not generalizable to other substances. And finally, going a little deeper, Kaji showed a strong concordance rate, but 46% of identical twins were not concordant. We would expect to see a 100% concordance rate with a trait that was fully genetic. So this suggests that there are both genetic and environmental factors that influence alcohol addiction. A better explanation then would be the diaphysis stress response, showing how nature and nurture effects interact. Genetics cause a vulnerability, but this needs to be triggered by environmental factors. So let's have a look at some psychological explanations of addiction. If we're suggesting addiction is due to psychological factors, we're including how we've learned from experience, things like socialization. This is focusing on the influence of nurture in creating addictive behaviour. One experience someone could have had is peer influence. So this is a social pressure to conform to those around us, to fit into the norms of the people we see as a valued group. This behaviour can be the form of taking an addictive substance used by that group. Social learning theory also gives an explanation. We learn through the observation of others' behaviour. We will then imitate that behaviour, especially if we see it as rewarding in some way. We're also more likely to imitate the behaviour of people we identify with. This explains why teens imitate the substance abuse of other teenagers. When evaluating the psychological explanation, we can find supporting research that shows people are more likely to start using addictive substances as a teenager and if they've got friends who use that substance. However, many people are able to resist peer influence, but still develop addictions, so there might be factors beyond conformity such as genes or the role of mental health conditions. Another criticism might be it's the other way around. Teens could actually be choosing peer groups that accept drug use because they want to use the drugs or are already addicted. So, how are addictions treated? Well, there are a range of interventions that have been designed to reduce addictive behaviour. An intervention is using activities to change behaviour or emotional states. One intervention is aversion therapy. This is based on the principles of classical conditioning. Clients are exposed to the addictive stimulus, so alcohol, cocaine, tobacco, at the same time as an unpleasant stimulus, so electric shocks or drugs that cause vomiting. This then causes an association between the addictive substance and the negative effect. Interestingly, smoking lots of cigarettes quickly causes a feeling of nausea, so it can be used as a type of aversion therapy.
Bart! Have you started smoking?
No!
Don't lie to me, boy! Uh-huh! Cigarettes, just as I thought.
They're not mine!
Yeah, right. Son, I'm going to teach you a lesson. I'm going to stand here and watch you smoke every one of those cigarettes. Then maybe you'll learn.
Homer gets it right again. So if we consider how aversion therapy improves mental health, if the addiction substance is associated with a negative sensation, the addictive substance will be avoided. But using behaviourism to treat addiction can be seen as reductionist. Addiction is more complex than simple pleasure seeking. Often addictions are linked to deeper mental health problems that aversion therapy doesn't address. A more holistic approach would be to use aversion therapy alongside treatments that address the root cause of the addiction, like CBT. There is research evidence that suggests aversion therapy is effective in the short term. One study shows that 69% of patients were still sober 1 year after alcohol aversion therapy. fMRI scans showed that these people had a reduction in activity in an area of the occipital lobe that's associated with cravings. But we could criticise aversion therapy as being unethical. It can be seen as giving people a punishment for having a mental health condition. Another intervention is placing someone on a self-management program. These focus on allowing the sufferer to take control of their own health and well-being, not the therapist. The sufferer will learn about the nature of their condition and develop their own coping skills and strategies. That doesn't mean they're on their own. Sufferers take part in self-help groups. These are meetings of peers, so other mental health sufferers. These groups are often formed from people who share the same cultural background, and members of these groups are encouraged to share their experience and offer each other emotional support. One important point, the focus here is on helping and listening, not diagnosis or medical treatment advice. A common design to self-help groups is a 12-step recovery program. The original was developed by a group called Alcoholics Anonymous, or the AA. A number of the AA's steps require members to believe in and give control over their lives to a higher power. But the popularity of the AA program has led to other 12-step programs being developed for other issues and addictions, often changing the focus from a higher power to self-control. We could say self-management programs, while not directly offering diagnosis or treatment, help improve mental health by providing emotional support, giving sufferers of addiction a chance to talk about their past experience in a way not possible with CBT or drug therapies. As self-help groups don't consider biological or cognitive causes, we could say they're reductionist. But self-help groups are often used in combination with mental health professionals providing CBT or drug treatments. In evaluation, self-management programs being used takes pressure off mental health services that can then focus on more extreme mental health problems. But the religious focus of many self-help programs may put off people who are struggling with addictions or other issues that need support. Now that we cover the content, you need to be able to use all that information to actually answer questions. And here are 5 questions I've made for you to test your skills. So pause the video and give them a go. And for those of you who support me on Patreon, I've put together another additional video showing you how to answer these properly. For everybody else, thanks for watching, liking, subscribing. This has been the last GCSE video. In this series, we've covered all of the non-research methods AQA GCSE content. If you want to learn research methods, you can check out my research methods playlist. Thank you for watching.